Heart disease, as we know, is ravishing our country. It's starting to ravish our world. So we're going to go into some real strategies tonight to prevent things. Did you guys enjoy the cardiac Kool-Aid tonight? We'll talk about that a little more. The online crowd, are probably going, what is that? We'll tell you in a moment, too. So we're going to jump right in because we got a lot of information to go over tonight. I hope everyone here has their learning style caps on, right? Because we're going to go into a lot of stuff. Tonight, I want you to pay close attention to the screen right now. It's a lot of squiggly lines. But the point being, I want you to look at the top line. There's a trend there. We see a trend in a downward regression over the last 40 years where heart disease has still gone down. Right below that, that flat line's cancer, by the way. Just to FYI, cancer's been relatively flat for 40 years. What does that tell us? We're not winning that war, are we? We see heart disease slightly going down, according to the CDC, but it's still the number one killer, and though we're decreased, it's still number one. Keep that in mind.
So the futuristic predictions really aren't favorable, and we see that stroke and cardiovascular disease are disproportionately increasing in the population. You can actually see those trends. Basically, even though the number of deaths per 100,000 may decrease slightly with all of our processes and procedures and medications, the number of cases are actually going to increase. So we may not be dying as much, but we may be getting sicker. And it's also said that we might be starting to die more often, and the process is lasting longer. So we're getting sicker, quicker, lasting longer, sicker, which serves us little benefit if our lives are full of paying for medical bills and prescription usage.
I just thought of something. So we're getting sicker, quicker, and diseases are getting stronger, longer. What do you think about that? Is that about right? Yeah.
Stronger, longer.
Stronger, longer.
So let's get a little bit more specific. Every 30 seconds, someone dies of a heart attack. Not only that, about every 40 seconds, an American has a heart attack. Oh, it's been 30 seconds. Someone just had a heart attack. Oh, They just died. Died. Oh, boy.
Think about that.
2,500 Americans die from heart disease each day. 250,000 people die of heart attacks each year before they even reach the hospital. 610,000 people die of heart disease in the United States every year. Does it sound like we're making much progress?
By the way, 2 more people just died. You got to get into this because what are we doing right now to correct this tragedy? What are we doing? There's really a couple of strategies that are being employed right now around our country and around our world. Number one is to decrease fat, especially saturated fat, because we know that fat can cause increased, those slight levels of cholesterol in the blood. And we also, under this strategy, would assume that cholesterol can increase the likelihood of heart disease. The second strategy is related to the first. Number two, since we assume that cholesterol increases potential plaque buildup, we must use medications to reduce the plaque. Okay? Those medications are called statin drugs. Anybody heard of statin drugs? That is big, big, big business. As you can see, just one drug, Crestor, 21.5 million prescriptions totaling $6 billion. Follow the money.
So with the employment of the current reduction strategies, we must really ask ourselves these questions. Is heart disease still the number one killer? The answer is yes. Is lowering cholesterol the answer? What about, is reducing fat the answer? Do statin drugs have negative side effects? These statistics should make you scratch your head and ask the profound question, why? Approximately 50% of patients who have had a heart attack or stroke have normal cholesterol.
Say that one more time. I want people to catch that one.
50% of the patients, individuals who have a heart attack or stroke have normal cholesterol. Approximately 50% of patients that have had an emergency room cardiovascular visit that resulted in death had a normal or less than normal cholesterol. patients who have had a cardiovascular event that have normal cholesterol and have high levels of chronic systemic inflammation or endothelial injury are at risk. Every year, heart disease and stroke costs are $316 billion in expenditures.
Now, we're going to go into a little bit of a controversial area here because we're not going to sit there and say that all drugs are bad. One of our mission statements here at Functional Medical Institute is to reduce the usage of unnecessary medications. That's very important. But we want you to know that if prescription drug usage is a business, it's got to make sense that the advertisement of that business is meant to bring in customers. And a customer for life is better than a customer for 3 weeks. Would everyone agree? So would we all agree that it's better for money for prescription drugs, especially manufacturers, to make customers for life? So there is such a thing as deceptive marketing. And I really want you to catch this because this is the way it's done. There's something called absolute risk and there's something called relative risk. So in the study, it's just one example you see on the screen. You see one group, which would be on one side called the statin group. The other group is the placebo group. Now, interestingly enough, these are 1,000 people. So out of these 1,000 people on each side, one group is giving a statin drug, the other group is giving a placebo. Out of 1,000 people, we see from the statin group, 1% had a non-fatal heart attack. From the placebo group, 2% had a non-fatal heart attack. So let's just stop right there for a moment. We're all reasonable people here, right? So what does that tell us? If the statin drugs were so good, then why are we at 1%? And if this not having them is so bad, then why did only 1% more or one more person have them? Kind of makes you scratch your head and go, wait a minute. So if we stop right there and we say absolute risk in this case would be 2% or 1%. In other words, 98% or 99% irrelevance. You with us so far on that one? Make sense? You guys are good? I'm watching the deer in the headlight looks, but it makes sense. Now, if we go down one step farther to use something called relative risk, as opposed to, remember, absolute risk. Absolute is absolute, relative is relative to something. So now we can say that, and this is the language they'll use, therefore, for every 2 people that are treated, it reduces the risk of heart attacks by 50%. Is that a true statement? Well, it kind of can be if you pull out 2% versus the 1%, which is exactly what they do. So it makes the studies sound a little bit misleading. And when that's broadcast out there, well, they're going to reduce the risk 50%. That sounds really good, doesn't it? But is it good? And is this sort of marketing deception prevalent in our society? We suggest that many times we need to open our eyes and check it out. Read the studies. Ask. Know that most studies are funded by whom? The pharmaceutical group. The people who answered correctly, I hope you did too. So, by the way, there's also potential side effects of statin drugs in this case. We're not saying they're bad in all cases, but these are side effects as noted by a well-respected clinic called the Mayo Clinic. And here they are: muscle pain and damage, liver damage, increased blood sugar or type 2 diabetes, neurological side effects, which is interesting, reduction of energy production through inhibition of something called coenzyme Q10, which, by the way, is necessary. Everybody say necessary. It's necessary for effective energy production in our body. By the way, interesting data that we studied recently and uncovered that some statin drug usage, we couldn't determine it was all of the statin drug family, but some indeed suggested muscle atrophy, which is muscle loss by induction of a gene called atrogen 1. So fascinating data out there. Just know that there are side effects. Even if you follow the relative risk pattern, the side effects are there. Correct? Okay.
So what really causes heart disease? The first two, age and family history, those are factors of heart disease that we really can't do anything about. Obviously some of us may want to or wish we could, but we're kind of stuck with those. Age and our families. But we do have control over the rest. Blood pressure, how we take care of our pressure. Salt intake, is it influencing our blood pressure? Stress, is it influencing our blood pressure? Our life, are we inactive? Did you know that sitting is the new smoking? A cause of heart disease. What about smoking in and of itself? Smoking a cigarette contains about 4,000 carcinogens. Carcinogens are cancer causing. Not only that, they cause heart disease. Diabetes, we can control whether or not we get type 2 diabetes, whether or not we are overweight or obese. Obesity contributes to heart disease. Cholesterol, as well as endothelial inflammation. That is inflammation of the inner lining of your arteries, the real troublemaker. So what really causes endothelial or the inner lining inflammation of your arteries that leads to vascular disease? Who's really responsible? There's a long, long list of these unsavory characters and players. Let's visit them.
Unsavory is the real word to describe these heinous creatures of our society right now.
Heinous.
Who is this?
Who is that?
That is Ronald McDonald force-feeding a baby a burger. Now he's progressed. Now he's beginning to hold a gun to people's head and say, eat those fries. But thankfully, Ronald, like most of America, gained weight. And now he can't chase you. And you can run away. And you really, really should.
So who is this? He has come for your soul.
I love this person. Little diabetes. Or as they say in Oklahoma, little diabetes. You got to have the Oklahoma dialect from time to time. By the way, type 2 diabetes needs to go away like a bad headache.
So what's this? Isn't this the real thing? Diet soda can be as bad as methamphetamines. We all know that sugar acts on the center in the brain that crack cocaine works on. So getting hooked up on sugar, sugary soda pop, or diet soda pop is working on that central place in your brain like crack cocaine. So is it really the real thing?
Well, we know that there's absolute 1,000% unequivocal truth in advertising, don't we? Truly. We have to have real food for a real lifestyle. And there you have it. Sugared up tea and pizza. Awesome. But really, when you cross it out and really name it for what it is, it's really bad food. Not food at all. We could probably say real poison for your death. That would be an equivalent of that advertisement from a truthful standpoint.
Oh, you always eat healthy, do you? Donuts just can't be bad. Well, tell me, how did you get on the preferred customer list at Krispy Kreme?
Speaking of Krispy Kreme, they came out with this new doll. It's called a Barbie doll. And obviously, she's not in the slim figure anymore. Too many donuts, I believe.
Bottom line is, a little fun just to kind of bring reality to the table. And perhaps an apple a day just might keep the doctor away and keep you out of the hospital.
Then if you do end up in the hospital, guess what'll happen? You're going to be crammed chock full of all kinds of health food. It's true. It's amazing the food that's in our hospital that creates inflammation, heart disease, and diabetes. Can someone say, duh?
Yeah.
What are we doing? You know why? Our theory suggests that perhaps we are serving food to please people instead of heal them. And all of us need to take a step back and understand that principle from what we're doing in all of our lives. Are we feeding food to ourselves to please ourselves versus heal ourselves? Are we feeding food to our children to please them versus heal them? And finally, might not be popular for the grandparents out there, but it's truthful. Are we feeding food to our grandkids to please them and make them love us, as opposed to healing them and teaching them life? More than a life lesson. Greatest gift you can give somebody is life. And life is lesson. And lessons are life. So we need to learn to teach our families and ourselves, and even our world, to stay out of this pit, this place that you see on the screen behind us. We don't need to be there. We're grateful for acute care, but we don't need to take up residence there every other year or every other month for something. Would we all agree?
So seriously, what can we do to avoid this number one killer? We all get one skin bag and we're in it. One human temple that we get to take care of, which means we've got to learn to understand our individual risk markers and to employ a true remedy to prevent and reverse heart disease. So let's get into a little bit of the science so we can employ a true remedy.
The first one, we underestimate the importance of this measure, body composition, or let's say, better said, central adiposity or central obesity. This is a big deal. We have become normal in our culture that we believe things such as this. Well, I'm getting older. I guess I'm just gaining weight because I'm getting older. We want to encourage everyone that's here tonight and listening that getting older is not synonymous from a normal capacity of weight gain. It's not. That's not normal. As a matter of fact, it's very abnormal. That's why body composition rather than scale weight is the proper way to go. When body composition is proper alignment, men between 10 and 20% and women between 18 and 28%, there's a lot of data out there that indicates we use less medications and we're more healthy because we're not carrying around the central adiposity, which creates inflammation. So this is an underutilized biomarker, if you will, for health. And we've got to get off the scales, folks, to determine if we're a good person or a bad person. I see plenty of slim people that are very, very sick. And I see plenty of people that are just a little bit overweight that are very, very healthy. It's all about body composition and working our system to create life. So we're going to dive in a little bit deeper now to some real serious, complex, which we're going to make simple, other biomarkers.
So as you're looking at the screen in front of you, that's an artery. And on your left-hand side, that's a very healthy artery. And as you're moving towards the right-hand side, you will start to see that artery get sicker and sicker. The inner lining of that artery is what's called the endothelium, the inner lining of the vascular structure. And every day, all of your blood is pumping through your arteries from the tip of your toes to the top of your head. And that endothelial lining may become injured. You can see at the far left-hand side where it's starting to build up something called plaque. And plaque equals atherosclerosis or hardening of the arteries, which is also known as heart disease. These risk factors, these markers that we can measure in your blood, give us an idea whether or not you are at risk for disease, have the disease, and if the disease is active, kind of where you are in the progression of hardening of the arteries. So we actually can predict what long-term outcome may be if we don't control the standard American diet and lifestyle. So each one of these lab values and these markers that we're going to go through and talk to you about tonight represent an individual risk marker. So we're going to dive deep into each one of these potentially deadly markers so that you can come to understand not just your body composition, but what's going on inside in real time.
Now, we want everyone to really get this tonight, so we're going to be very diligent about each marker. The words are complex, but the result is not. Okay, the words are complex, the result is not. The first one is called F2 isoprostanes. Basically, it's a prostaglandin compound that is formed from a free radical. Okay, free radicals, too many in our system, create damage. And it's the oxidation of something called arachidonic acid. All that said, it's cellular damage. It's oxidative damage. So, arachidonic acid is required by your body to make muscles and also for basic functioning. So we need it. However, too much can be harmful and can drive the production of this F2 isoprostane compound. Our body can make its own arachidonic acid from foods such as egg yolks and even some red meat. So there is some benefit, but too much can become a problem, because if we get too much of this damage or arachidonic acid in our cells, our blood vessels constrict, which causes our blood pressure to go up, promotes more blood clotting, and that can result in a heart attack or stroke under certain conditions. So when this is elevated, it's the very beginning of sort of a plaque buildup, and research does show that high levels of these S2 isoprostanes indicate a 30% more likelihood to develop heart disease. So if we see these things, this is one of our urine markers, then we know there's trouble afoot. This is like the first thing that goes, wow, we've got problems. Another way to look at it, if we look at the pictures, and we got to be honest about this, we know that increased exercise and better nutrition will indeed reduce oxidative damage, and as well as inactivity and even poor food choices in our lifestyle habits will increase oxidative damage. So there is a lot of benefit to exercising right, sleeping right, resting right, and taking the right foods. And it's interesting to note too that the arachidonic acid measurement that we see many times measured also in another part of this blood work, which we won't talk about tonight, is in the fatty acid section. And personally, I have done, and I know Dr. Michele would concur, hundreds of these tests over the last several years, probably even 1,000. It's that many. Arachidonic acid elevation is, I think it's been in every one that I've looked at. Every one. I can't recall one that it wasn't. Can you?
No. Too many breads, grains.
Yep.
Omega-6s.
We underestimate the damage of the standard American lifestyle in regard to cellular health.
Mm-hmm. So oxidized LDL, this is actually a measure of protein damage due to oxidation. It's one of the first steps when the endothelial lining becomes injured. LDL cholesterol can get underneath that endothelial lining, in those cracks, in those fissures, and it triggers inflammation. Inflammation will activate your immune system. Your immune system will come to the rescue, and it creates what are called foam cells. So foam cells will try to eat up this stuff underneath the lining of your arteries to protect you. And they become fat on what's getting underneath the endothelial lining, and they begin to die. The body starts to produce excess amounts of triglycerides, which actually will put an individual at risk for metabolic syndrome in the next 5 years. And metabolic syndrome is the precursor to type 2 diabetes. So when our arteries get under stress and oxidation begins to elevate, then it sets up that inflammatory syndrome of metabolic syndrome, predisposing us to type 2 diabetes. Oxidized LDL is also associated with increased abdominal obesity, increased triglyceride levels, and high blood sugar. It may be twice as good at helping your doctor know if you are actually at risk for heart disease as any one of the traditional cholesterol blood markers. Oxidized LDL.
And we're saying this because sometimes many of us have never heard of these things. It's because they're not typically ran in standard lab panels. And the only explanation I have with that is somehow insurance has dictated that. Good or bad, that's the only explanation I have. And that's concerning because we're missing so much. Remember what Dr. Michele said earlier, that half of the deaths occur with people with low or below normal cholesterol. If we're just measuring cholesterol levels, obviously that's not telling us the complete story because we're missing half of those 610,000 people. I'm going to say that again. 610,000 people that die every year.
Bam.
We miss it. We miss that. Now, a couple more markers, ADMA and SDMA. They measure kind of what's called endothelial dysfunction. So our vessels are lined with this endothelial layer. And inside that layer, it's in constant contact with this blood supply. So if we have a good blood supply coming through with good stuff, it's not going to have much negative effect. But if we expose that blood supply and in turn the endothelium or the layer to a bad or damaged stuff coming through, it's going to cause problem. It's going to damage the endothelium. When it gets damaged, we're at increased risk for cardiovascular disease or even renal or kidney failure. ADMA, asymmetric dimethylarginine, big word, just know it as ADMA. Everybody say ADMA.
ADMA.
And SDMA, known as symmetric dimethylarginine. Everybody say SDMA.
SDMA.
Those are compounds made in the body as proteins are degraded or broken down. Those proteins come from the degradation of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide makes our vessels go poof. Everybody say poof.
Poof.
Makes them get big. So more blood can go through. And that makes sense, right? So if your blood pressure is high, that would mean probably your nitric oxide is not working too well, correct? So we got to understand that elevated levels of a reduced nitric oxide production or damage is going to cause us problem. Case in point, look at all these factors here. When nitric oxide is properly elevated, look at all the good things that can happen. We have this thing called harmony. It's like this symphony that plays this beautiful music. I'm not a classical music fan because I don't understand the words. There's no words. However, I understand beautiful music. When things are working together, it's cool. But has anyone been to a concert before where one instrument is way out of tune? When that does, you may have 99 other instruments playing just wonderful, but that one gets out of tune, it ruins the whole thing. Our bodies are designed to work like that. We don't want things to head into the wrong direction. We want them going the right direction always, okay? So keep that in mind as we go forward.
So microalbumin is a protein that can be leached out into the urine. The quantification of a small amount of albumin in the urine is never really a good thing. This can indicate that there is actual damage to the kidneys, that SDMA will elevate and microalbumin will show up in the urine. You know, your kidneys have a very important role in keeping you alive and well. Their main function is actually to get rid of waste and toxins from your body every single day, 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year. And this is actually done by that inner layer, that endothelial lining, or that layer of cells that line the blood vessels inside the kidneys. And they act like a coffee filter. So you can think of the inner lining of your kidneys as kind of like a coffee filter. And they filter your blood to get rid of the waste in your urine. Albumin is a protein that's it's found in your blood, and it's not found in your urine. That means the microalbumin test measures very, 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 very small amounts of protein or albumin that can leak into your urine through that endothelial lining of the kidneys if it becomes injured. And this may actually be indicative of kidney damage or even diabetes. Diabetes is a tremendous harm to the kidneys. It's one of the number one things that actually kills the kidneys next to heart disease. So please note that if you have high albumin in your urine, it can be due to kidney disease, or even you can have some albumin in the urine after a urinary tract infection. So take a look up there. You see that coffee filter? It gives you a good visual aid of how your kidneys filter things in and out. It hangs on to albumin, but if there are holes in that coffee filter, it's going to spill it into the urine as microalbumin. And this is not a good thing. You know, coffee grounds in coffee,
Whew, yuck.
it's kind of less than a pure cup of coffee, right? And that may mean possible damage to the filter. Just like kidneys, if you see microalbumin in the urine, there might be something wrong with the kidneys. Microalbumin may signal damage to our filtration system.
One of my favorite markers is HSCRP. It stands for high sensitivity C-reactive protein. It's interesting because it has been associated with vulnerable plaque, and so it's produced in the liver when inflammation is present. Now, I want everybody to understand that chronic systemic inflammation is a precursor or a part of all disease processes. So is this a valuable marker? Yes. Traditionally, it's been used to show or identify risk of infection or chronic inflammatory conditions, but that's from a high level. So this high sensitivity measures it from a lower level, which gives us smaller measurements to select from. So if we see elevated CRP from a small level, that can be low-grade elevated systemic inflammation, correct? Everyone sees that. Now, it's not always obvious, but it certainly can occur in the arteries because, as Dr. Michele indicated, when something gets underneath the arterial wall that doesn't belong there, the body says, hey, you intruder, get out of there. And it sends all of its army to go to that place and just destroy it. Our body's really good about that, but in turn, it creates those foam cells. So CRP is kind of like a silent killer. When it's elevated chronically, and most folks have a little chronic systemic inflammation in their system. When we see CRP, it is a red flag because we've got to bring it down. Typically, CRP is elevated for the following reasons: poor diet, lack of exercise, over-exercise, lack of sleep, high stress, poor oral health, slight infection, or even slight injury. It elevates it too much. And if you can imagine like a bonfire versus a match, on the top curve, it's like a bell curve. It's supposed to see something damaging and go to it and get after it quickly. But when it's done doing its job, it's supposed to come back down, as opposed to coming up and staying elevated. Now, does it make sense to everyone? If your inflammation is always elevated all the time, what could that do to your immune system? Could it weaken it? Yes, the answer is true.
So, two sides of vulnerable plaque: MPO, which is myeloperoxidase, and LP-PLA2. As you can see on the inner side, or inside the vessel, or what's called the outside, this is an active area where the white blood cells are suspecting that there is a crack or a fissure in that lining. And the white blood cells will actually think that it's like a bacterial infection, and it will secrete out this stuff called bleach, myeloperoxidase. The inside of the vessel wall, that LP-PLA2, this is like a volcano that's growing inside the artery wall. And it is used to tell us if there is an active inflammatory process inside that wall. So the presence of LP-PLA2 in your lab can assess your risk of heart disease. It's active, growing plaque. When LDL cholesterol, the carrier of the bad stuff, we all hear about the good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. The LDL bad cholesterol gets underneath the endothelial lining and becomes oxidized, and your body tries to get rid of that by making LP-PLA2. It starts seeing this and engulfing it and eating it, becoming a foam cell and getting bigger and bigger, contributing to the inflammation and increased cholesterol accumulation that is happening on the inside of the artery wall. And it's forming what's called plaque. So inflammation can also make this nice little cap-like covering very thin. That volcano is growing day after day, year after year, if we're not careful, and that plaque begins to get thin. And it can slowly form a blood clot, which can then block the flow of blood. If the blood flowing to the heart is blocked, it may cause what's called a heart attack. And if that same blockage occurs in the brain, it's called a heart attack of the brain or a stroke. So again, MPO is when that volcano gets to a certain critical mass, and this enzyme is released by the white blood cells because it senses the volcano is blowing, and your body's response to the damaged artery wall as it becomes thin and cracked and unstable due to that cholesterol accumulation and inflammation is to release this stuff called MPO, kind of like bleach. And when the wall becomes so damaged, cholesterol enters and builds up. This myeloperoxidase kills that cholesterol, and it damages the cholesterol, and it contributes to the formation of those foam cells. The immune cells that morph into this giant macrophage or foam cell, contributing to that chronic inflammation called hardening of the arteries or heart disease. So over time, the artery wall becomes full of plaque, just like the lava in a volcano, and the plaque buildup on the artery wall can burst, form a clot, create a heart attack and a stroke, and we can pick these vulnerabilities up on blood lab.
So everyone at the time of this particular video right now, there's in the news at least the issue of a current volcanic situation. This is what we're talking about. When the lava begins to spew out, quite frankly, all hell breaks loose in our life and also in our body. It causes evacuation in our life and in our body. Now, with that said, just when you look at a lab report or you have these measures, there's two sides. Remember, LPPLA2 is markers of under the wall. MPO is markers above the wall. So if we have low LPPLA2, which is markers under the wall, and high MPO, we have less active cholesterol action under the wall, but we have a very unstable cap. Doesn't take much to break through. If we have high LPPLA2, which is a lot of activity under the wall, low MPO, we have a lot of this activity, but we have a relatively stable cap. The worst case scenario is a lot of activity under the wall with an unstable cap. And we know, as Dr. Michele said correctly, if the cap blows, you're going to get this walled off situation called a clot, because the body doesn't want this other mess to go downstream anymore. Unfortunately, the side effect is cutting off the oxygen to that part too. So that's why it can become very damaging. We need to watch these markers because it tells you what's coming at you potentially.
So inflammatory testing assesses disease risk. So let's take a close look at an overall depiction of what each of these really means as far as inflammatory markers and what they indicate. So you'll see risk of disease. Those first two that we talked about, F2-isoPs or F2-isoprostanes, they indicate oxidation, and oxidized LDL indicates a risk for metabolic syndrome. Those are risk markers of potential disease formation. If we have the presence of disease, we're going to see the elevation of ADMA and SDMA, which are the endothelial lining markers of the vessels and the kidneys. We're going to see an elevation in microalbumin potentially, which is endothelial lining dysfunction or a leaky filter in the endothelium of the kidneys. And you may see an elevation in high sensitive C-reactive protein, which is just generalized, not just, but it's generalized inflammation and can be directly related to cardiovascular inflammation. Those markers indicate the presence of disease. When we have disease activity, those two markers that we talked about at the end, LPPLA2 indicating vulnerable active plaque risk in the necrotic core of the artery, or myeloperoxidase, a vulnerable plaque risk, which means that cap just may come off the top and cause you a heart attack or stroke.
Now, the question becomes, what can you do about this, if anything, and can it be corrected? Good news is there's plenty you can do, and the good news is it can be corrected and certainly stopped or prevented or halted. This is a big deal. Where do you start? This is not rocket science. We have to start at the basics. This is where you get your best return on investment. Does anybody understand investments? When you give a little bit, you get a lot back. Isn't that the cool investment? This is an area you can give a little bit and get a lot back. 85% of our long-term health is tied to nutrition. I like the statement, you can't outrun your fork. But we're going to change it a little bit tonight. We're going to say it together, I cannot outrun my fork. So let's say that now. I cannot outrun my fork. And we're going to continue this with the greatest medical decision I make is at the end of my fork. So here we go. The greatest decision that I make is at the end of my fork. And so understand that our nutrition is tied to everything. And please take this home with you. We can't stand diets. Don't ever diet. Don't tie diets to weight loss. That is plain silly. It's stupid, actually, because it's going to distort your brain about body composition. We chase that scale around like it determines if we're a good person or not. It's silly to do that. 85% of our long-term outcome is consistent with what? Food in regard to fuel we put in our body. It's the same thing as putting gas in our car. I want everyone, if you don't believe this, to go to Quick Trip We have Quick Trips in our state. For those of you online going, what is that? It's a convenience store, right? So get a little fired up there. So go to Quick Trip, go to your convenience store, and when you get gas, but before you put the gas in, I want you to go inside the store and get a big can of Coke or a big bottle of Coke. Now, open the gas tank, pour the Coke in first, and then fill the rest up with gas. Do that every time. I'm serious. Every time. It will do two things. Number one, it will kill your car. But on the upside, I guess it will do something positive. You'll be walking more, so it's good. I don't know where that came from. It just sounded appropriate at the time. So 85% is about our food or nutrition. We got this 15% outliers. It's really our activity, stress management, sleep, life, just how we do things, right? And again, it's very, very simple to understand, but this is where we had to put focus because this is what's going to make us well. It's also what's made us sick.
So focus, focus, focus. I think we drove home the point that this matters. What do you call this?
That's a fork curl.
Fork curls. So fork curls are very, very important. Nutrition, nutrition, nutrition. Nutrition is the key. You know, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, way back in the day, he had it right. He said, let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food. So what are we doing with all these other things if we aren't following the principles of medicine, what we do 365 days of the year, every single day, at least 3 times a day, we are feeding ourselves either medicine or poison. So our nutritional protocol is an anti-inflammatory nutritional protocol at the Functional Medical Institute. You know, we propagate this forward to everybody out the door every single day, that at least 2 low glycemic fruits, antioxidant rich berries, blackberries, blueberries, strawberries, things like apples, oranges, low glycemic fruits. When body composition normalizes, then other fruits, of course, can be added in there. You know, but we want to optimize body composition naturally and normally with a healthy lifestyle. Appropriate healthy fats like good avocados, good oils, good omega-3 fatty acids, good fish, good oils. At least 4 to 5 cups of non-root, exclude those potatoes, beets, carrots, etc., until your body composition normalizes, and unlimited greens, at least 4 to 5 cups. Most of us don't get enough green vegetables. Remember, it takes more calories to burn those green vegetables than there are calories in them. So food for thought.
I like what you just said. Food for thought. Did you catch that?
For your fork curls.
You know, I thought of something funny too. We want to eat enough broccoli until you start having broccoli sprouts come out of your ears.
And broccoli sprouts help cure cancer.
What is that growing in your ear? Is that hair coming out as you're aging, or is that a broccoli sprout? Check your spouse's ears. Just a thought.
Let me see.
There's no broccoli in there. I don't know what that is.
It's sprouting something.
What do we need to avoid? I like to call these unfoods because they're not foods at all. Frankly, they're not fit for human consumption anymore. Some of these in there are pretty obvious. As you guys have heard us talk many times, some of you have heard or seen the grain video we did. I'm not sorry to tell you this, but grains today, all grains, corn, soy, wheat, and even now we've read recently that the ground that's planted for oats is sprayed with the same thing these aforementioned plants are sprayed with. It's called Roundup. Roundup contains glyphosate. Glyphosate our livers cannot handle. It is a carcinogen. And, you know, I realize that there's burger and fries and hot dogs with buns around. They're not fit for human consumption. Eat at your own risk. I know that goes right against the grain. However, I grew up like that too. We grew up like that. It's a hard change. We were talking even before tonight's, sort of event that change is hard. We get comfortable doing the same things. You know, it's funny, I look out here at the crowd and I see familiar faces, which is interesting. But I also note that most of you sit in the same place you did last time. True, right? True.
Change is
and
hard.
And it's interesting. Next time you come to the class, I know at home or out there watching online, it doesn't matter to you, but I want you to sit in a different angle. Okay, try it. Just go. If you're sitting here, we want Victoria to go back there. If you know what I'm talking about. So we have to avoid these inflammatory foods. They do cause us heart disease. Bottom line.
Because there is no drug, no supplement, no procedure or prayer that will override the deadly effects of the chronic ingestion of the standard American diet. Sugars, grains, breads, artificial sweeteners, processed foods, chemically laden foods, genetically modified, poisonous food with MSG, etc. and otherwise. The 20 ingredients on that slide ahead of you should give you some indication of the toxins that we ingest. Just start turning your labels over and look what's on it. If there are things like monosodium glutamate on it, polysorbate 80, red dyes, green dyes, blue dyes, hydrogenated, fractionated oils, trans fats, saturated fats, what on earth is in it? Do we look? Do we evaluate? Do we think about our livers having to screen these things out, our kidneys having to understand it, our brains having to see this fuel? We cannot outrun that. We've got to eliminate it and just simply detoxify it. Don't put it in.
That looking at that slide gives me a headache because it looks like a typical label, doesn't it? See the ingredients, if there's too many ingredients in there that we can't read, many times we get frustrated and say, oh well, what the heck? But what we should be saying is, that's a problem, put it back. Less ingredients is better. If we understand what the ingredients are, my goodness, that's healthy. If we don't, we enter that digestion or ingestion of that food at our own risk. Very important. What about exercise? We got these figures from the American Heart Association. Now, we are not certainly fans of any nonprofit group that promotes foods that cause a disease that the group is said to try to avoid. However, this is one they got right. We need to move. Minimally speaking, every week, 150 minutes of moderate activity. We've noticed some things there for you. It's movement. Everybody I watched came in here tonight, you moved a little bit. Some of you moved better than others, and that's okay. Start small, move more, sit less. Sitting is the new what?
Smoking.
And it's true. We need to move. Our arms are made to do more than just do the old fork curl, and our legs are made to do more than hang over the edge of a chair. It's interesting. They're made to make us ambulate, make us move. So the equivalent of 150 minutes of moderate intensity or just movement, it is going to be 75 minutes of high intensity. And this is a note here for everyone. Please understand this. There is something called the anaerobic threshold. You see the factor up there. It's 180 minus your age. If your heart rate is above that during exercise, this is a side note, you're going to be burning mostly sugars. If it goes below that, generally speaking, you're going to be burning mostly fatty acids that are oxidized for use. So understand that high intensity all the time is not always best, especially if you have a high stressed out system. High stressed out system is going to produce a lot of cortisol, and that can be a lot of inflammation too. So sometimes we can exercise too much, but it's all about movement. We just need to learn to move more, sit less, eat better, sleep better, and for my goodness, handle life a little bit better. Now, tonight, we've really threw a lot of information out there for you in a hurry. And we did it intentionally because we wanted you to understand there's more to lab values and markers than meets the eye. The basic normal stuff, getting a call that says you're normal, is not something you really want to hear. I want to hear that I'm optimal. My wife is optimal, isn't she? She's optimally looking.
Thank you, honey.
She's optimally sexy. It's cool, right? I can say that, right? But here's what I'm getting at. We're trying to get you to buy into something. There was a saying years ago, and it had a very negative connotation, and we like to take things that are negative and turn them around. And the saying was something like this: gosh, I guess you're going to drink that Kool-Aid, aren't you? Anybody heard that before? Guess what? Tonight, you drank the Kool-Aid. It was called cardiac Kool-Aid. And cardiac Kool-Aid tells you can get well. But we also created a special drink for you tonight that you have that was designed especially to promote cardiac health. Why did we do that? Because people's weaknesses are in the area of sweets, aren't they? And if we can find a substitute that we can go to and meet that need while providing cardiac health, and you can have as much of this as you want, it's great.